Hello, everyone. I'm Carlos White, partner at Husch Blackwell's Financial Services and Capital Markets Group. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. The topics of this webinar are especially relevant in light of the newly minted federal holiday, Juneteenth, which is a holiday that highlights the power of information, endurance, and collective action. I am so passionate about this topic, so it's best that I work on my written script so that we can keep you on time and keep you on track. The first question that you may ask is, why did we decide to put together this program? Well, to paraphrase Charles Dickens, it is the best of times and it is the worst of times for minority business enterprises, or MBEs. On the one hand, there's explosive growth in the number of innovative and talented MBEs, and these businesses generate over $700 billion in annual sales. Yet, on the other hand, these businesses are, relatively speaking, very small, both in revenues and employee count. The lack of size of the MBEs can directly and indirectly be attributed to barriers that restricts MBEs' ability to receive relevant, market-based technical information, develop meaningful business networks, and access to needed capital. So, how can we help to empower and equip MBEs with the tools to overcome these barriers in order for them to be able to continue to grow our economy and reduce the wealth gap? Unfortunately, we will not be able to solve all these issues during this webinar, but if you give these impressive panelists a week, they probably could come up with a solution, as well as find a new coach for the Dallas Mavericks. But in all seriousness, for this webinar, we have assembled an exceptional group of panelists. This webinar will consist of 3 panels, and these panels will provide insights on the racial wealth gap from both a macro and micro perspective, and discuss strategies to empower MBEs to help reduce the racial wealth gap. Before introducing our great co-sponsor, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit via the question box. We will answer questions via email as soon as we can. Please also check out the resources folder for information about our newly formed Economic Development Impact Practice and to connect with us on social media. Toward the end of the program, be sure to complete our short survey. With these housekeeping items out of the way, Husch Blackwell is very fortunate to co-sponsor this event with Impact Ventures. We have Impact Ventures CEO and founder, Benjamin Van, with us today. Benjamin brings 13 years of professional experience in entrepreneurship and impact investing. He was named top 500 most powerful CEOs in Dallas by DCEO magazine. Now, I would like to turn it over to Ben so he can welcome you on behalf of Impact Ventures.
Thank you, Carlos, and thank you all for joining us today on this special Juneteenth edition of this event, where we're bringing a very important conversation, hopefully to your living rooms, to your kitchens, wherever you are today viewing this event. And I'm excited to be here to host this conversation alongside of you, Carlos. So I want to go ahead and move forward with introducing our first panelist and our guest, my friend in Impact, Mr. Roy Lopez, who is the Assistant Vice President at the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. And so thank you for joining us and really painting a big picture for this issue of the racial wealth gap that we're diving into today. So Carlos, I'll let you take it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Benjamin. For this panel, we have Roy Lopez, who will provide a macro discussion on the racial wealth gap. I have my Steve Harvey Family Feud cue cards to make sure that we keep on track again. Roy, the first question I want to ask you is, one of the things that the Fed does so well is monitor and track the research that tells us what issues are important to the economic resiliency of underserved communities. What lessons or insights should MBEs know or pay attention to, particularly coming out of the past 15 months and as the economy continues to rebuild?
Well, thank you so much, Carlos. I certainly appreciate the time and the effort, and happy Juneteenth to you. And I hope each and every one of you have a wonderful weekend. But first, I have to start with my disclaimer here, which is these are my words and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas or the Federal Reserve System. So I got that out of the way. So with your question, there's certainly a lot to unpack there. We have seen the highs, we have seen the lows. And the reason we see the highs and we see the lows is because we're proactive about working with our small businesses, our entrepreneurs. We do a series of surveys. One of the big surveys that we do is our small business credit survey that really tackles and looks at access to credit. We do a ton of roundtables across the district with small business owners, trying to gauge what were those themes, what came out of the pandemic with small businesses. We just wrapped up our own web series called Racism in the Economy, which really focused on entrepreneurship. So, that's where I'm kind of drawing my base of knowledge. But with these kind of three sources, certain themes certainly did come out, Carlos, as you all know, which is, one of them that really resonated, that really came out was this importance of mentoring, the importance of business coaching in the field. As you know, these small businesses needed to pivot, I think is the word of 2020, right? But it was so true for businesses. They needed to really understand online point of sale presence. How do you shift to that in a virtual setting? You needed to kind of, if you're a restaurant, how do you take on more of the drive-through, right? How do you take on more of the work from home strategies? Well, many of our minority businesses needed to lean on these mentorship relationships, these banking relationships, just relationships in general. And the reality is that in many of our communities, Latino communities, and Black communities, those mentorships, those partnerships are not always there. So, one of the things that we definitely heard was big heroes, chambers of commerce, small business development entities, and intermediaries, community development financial institutions that were working hand in hand with our small businesses, really getting them through this pandemic. It was a diametrical shift for our small businesses. And so when we saw this, people needed to help them along the way. So we have our own heroes, CDFIs, chambers of commerce, some credit unions, certainly. Another thing we saw, Carlos, was the need for elevated workforce strategies. When you ask our small businesses what their number one issue right now is, it's workforce. It's always great to hire your cousin or your tia, but if you're a small business, and when I say small, I'm talking about the micro business, less than 5, you really need to hone in on the whole notion of how do you recruit? How do you retain your best employees? How do you develop your employees? Because as you well know, there is rising price pressure to get the best and brightest. And the reality is if you want to grow your business, you need good people to help you grow that business. And of course, the third component here was certainly access to capital. We saw that access to capital during the pandemic was not always easy for our small businesses, particularly those micro businesses of under 5. Those things, and many of our small businesses, they suffered from a lot of self-doubt. They didn't want to go to the banks. They didn't want to go to the credit unions. And as a result, many of those businesses, failed. Because if you're going to grow, you need that access to capital. And one of the things that we saw and we kept on hearing from small businesses is that, there's two ways basically to finance a small business. There's the debt side, and then there's the equity side. And I think Ben's going to be talking about the equity side. But from our minority businesses, we don't talk enough about the equity side. And sometimes we don't even talk about the debt side enough. It's like if you want to grow your business, just put it on a credit card or you ask friends and family. With most of our minority micro businesses, and there is an ecosystem out there that can finance our small businesses, but it takes, going back to my earlier point, mentorship, banking relationships, CDFIs that can, they're entry points into the financial system. that can help you grow, expand, and develop your business. Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot of other things. You know, the importance of personal credit. If you wanted to develop resiliency with your small business, having personal credit, which would be good, helped you along the way. Just helping along the way with business planning, with cash flow management. Big kudos to a group that I used to work with very closely, SCORE. SCORE are retired, mostly CEOs, executives that help small businesses grow. Where we saw a lot of issues are on cash flow, really understanding their business strategy. You know, we also saw, you know, what were the kind of the hindrances? We certainly saw like a lot of people were hesitant to get into the entrepreneurial space, especially minorities, because you're working at the community college, you're working at the school district, you don't want to give up your benefits. It's a scary world to be an entrepreneur. You don't want to give up your retirement benefit. You don't want to give up your medical benefits. And who can blame them, right? It's a scary world to be out there. Another thing is mounting student debt. We saw mounting student debt, and as a result, it hinders entrepreneurship. We're in a decline of entrepreneurship since the 1970s. As a result of that, you know, what can we do to spur minority entrepreneurship? Goes back to those relationships, banking relationships, CDFI relationships. So in a nutshell, that's some of the things that we're seeing, Carlos.
Okay, great. Per the 2019 survey of consumer finances, the typical white family has 8 times the wealth of a typical Black family, and 5 times the wealth of the typical Hispanic family. From the Federal Reserve's vantage point, what are some of the reasons for this large disparity?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, these structural barriers have existed, and they have existed for a long time. I think the first thing we have to do is just acknowledge that these barriers certainly do exist. One of the things that we definitely see with our small businesses is going back to my original point of access to capital, access to banking. You go down to communities just here in Dallas, you know, Pleasant Grove, you know, Oak Cliff. We don't see the same number of financial institutions that you do, say, north of 30. That's just a fact. You know, I'll give you another example of some of the structural issue that we're seeing with our small businesses and with our entrepreneurs. I'm in South Dallas by visiting a small business near Fair Park. The digital divides that we see in some of our low-income communities in our urban core, not far from downtown, by the way, big digital divides. Our business, I visited a business owner there, and she was talking about her issue with communicating. She's an insurance business, communicating with the Department of Insurance in Austin. She needed a good connection, so that connectivity wasn't there. This is another example of kind of that structural issue, right? Obviously, education continues to be a structural issue. You know, at the Fed, we say what you learn is what you earn. And that's so true. You know, so we got to remove those barriers. Another, you know, structural issue that we're seeing that our small businesses talk about is this whole notion of intergenerational wealth and transfer. You know, if you have mom and dad pass, you know, $1 million, that's certainly great for your entrepreneurial benefits, right? But, you know, growing up, myself in the Rio Grande Valley, where, you know, this intergenerational transfer is almost non-existent. It's harder. So you're starting from scratch. That doesn't always happen. You talked about kind of the wealth gap. You know, that contributes, this whole notion of intergenerational wealth. It goes back to what you're talking about, those systemic issues. How do we get that system to flow better? And so those are just some realities that we're seeing. You know, one alarming trend that we've heard from our small businesses as well is that Black and Latino businesses find markets with Black and Latino customer bases, which is good. But while white businesses tend to have a much expanded marketplace, so how do we overcome those barriers? How do we market? How do we communicate the message that a business is a business is a business? So, those are things that we have to contemplate, and we have to really think through these structural components of what is happening out in that small business ecosystem.
Great. Oh, one thing I do want to kind of piggyback, because you was mentioning the difference between debt and equity earlier, is that I've noticed that profits generated by, I read a report where publicly traded corporations from 2004 to 2019 amounted to about 13.4 trillion being paid to shareholders. But these payouts overwhelmingly went to white families. Roy, how does this unequal distribution of stock ownership play to the increasing role in widening the racial wealth gap? And what are some of the steps you think that we can take to increase stock ownership among minority groups?
Oh, Carlos, you give me these easy questions. No, the reality is, the Fed is in the market of how do we, the fundamental question at the Fed obviously is, it's the dual mandate. How do we keep inflation at bay and keep employment sustained? Those are fundamental questions. But, one of the components of that, or subcomponents of the dual mandate, is how do you create an inclusive economy? One that works for everyone, not just rich, not just white, not just Black, but works for everyone. And those are tough questions. But getting back to your question, it's the Fed is really looking at, you're talking about investable income here, right? So it really comes back to the base, right? Mm-hmm. So many of our minority families don't have investable income. It's just the reality, and so we have to go back to the basics of really finding that job, that living wage job, and you have to save to invest, and that is that can be hard when you're having to deal with medicine, putting food on the table. You're trying to get to the basics. And so many of our minority families, you mentioned the wealth gap. There's also an income gap as well. So the reality is, how do we go back to the basics? Another component of this is the whole notion of financial coaches and financial planners. The game is unequal in minority communities. We just don't have the same number of financial planners, financial coaches that work with you. And it's a long game. This is not a short game. If you're wanting to invest, it's not immediate return. You're talking about 20, 30, 40 years down the line. So it's a long game. But there seems to be a real lack of mentors. I personally had a great mentor. Mm-hmm. And my uncle, my 96-year-old uncle, World War II veteran. But he was fantastic with regard to, saving, really understanding the importance of getting that little nest egg and putting it towards your retirement. We put out a report earlier this summer about retirement. And unfortunately, our minority communities in Texas, we looked at, Texas, Latinos and Blacks are really behind with regard to retirement and retirement savings. So what do we do? How can we continue to look at those numbers and make asset building sexy again? I don't know exactly how we can do that. You don't go to a party these days and talk about how much you're saving, right? You talk about how much you bought. But the reality is that we have got to make it easier and seamless for people to save.
Great. Roy, this has been absolutely fantastic. We really appreciate all your invaluable insights and bringing sexy back to the Federal Reserve. Now we'll move to panel 2 to discuss the role banks, financial institutions, and MBA certification agencies play in empowering MBEs and closing the racial wealth gap. All right, for this panel, We have Cherie Hicks and Andrew Nash joining Benjamin, of course. Cherie is Vice President of Business and Community Development at Amegy Bank. She focused on growing the bank's lending and community development efforts. Cherie is an accomplished executive that blends her diverse background in commercial lending, marketing, public affairs, and strategic development to yield maximum results to her stakeholders and to teams that she leads. Andrew Nash serves as Director of Operations for the DFW Minority Supplier Development Council, DFW meaning Dallas-Fort Worth. In this capacity, Andrew helps to oversee one of the largest MBE certification agencies in the U.S., and he brings together MBEs to do business with Fortune 500 companies. Andrew is also currently serving on the Texas Historically Underutilized Business, which we call HUB, working group. And the HUB promotes procurement opportunities for small, minority, and women-owned businesses in Texas. So to kick off this panel, Cherie, I want to ask you the first question. If you could provide guidance to an entrepreneur or small business owner, what are some of the items you would recommend they have in place prior to them seeking access to capital?
Well, Carlos, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this discussion today and going after Roy and trying to figure out how to bring sexy back to Ashley. I think that was a setup, but really there's a couple of things. We have the opportunity to really talk to a lot of different entrepreneurs, business owners, people who are looking to start a business. And, there's a couple of things that really come to mind I start to really think about is when we start to talk about access to capital, really what does that really mean? To me, it's a buzzword that we oftentimes hear that you need access to capital. And so that's the first thing that I recommend to an entrepreneur or business owner. Understand, what does it mean when I say access to capital? Debt is good to have if you're able to manage that debt. Capital is good to have if you're able to manage that capital. But if I give you capital and you really just don't know what to do with it, then I've done you a disservice. Right. And so that's one thing that I would recommend. And then secondly, know your industry. It's really incumbent upon business owners and entrepreneurs to know their industry, know the barriers to entry. Sit down and do a SWOT analysis on the industry, on your business. Who is your competition? I know as entrepreneurs, oftentimes we're really busy just trying to bake the best cookie that we can bake, and you don't have the opportunity to really look up, from the flour and the sugar and everything that's going on and really figure out, what do I need to do to figure out what's going on in my industry? You should know who your competition is. You should anticipate how your competition is going to come towards you. I think the one thing that none of us anticipated was COVID, but COVID has happened now. So let's anticipate what could potentially happen if we have a market interruption like COVID. There's no studies that have been done on it prior to now, but I encourage business owners to really stop and to think about that. What if a pandemic happened again? What would happen? We saw that, I think Roy mentioned this, is that there was a lack of relationships with financial institutions. Specifically around minority-owned businesses. And so what I would say is also get a relationship with your banker. If someone says, who's your banker, and they ask you, can you call them, and the number starts out at 1-800, you don't have a relationship with your banker. That's right. I really encourage business owners to stop and ask your banker, hey, what's your cell phone number? So those times when you have more month than money, you can call your banker and you can talk to them about that. And also they have those technical resources that you really need. Again, going back to the thought process of someone who's baking cookies, you're great at baking, but when you come to me as a banker, the first things I'm going to ask you about are your financials. That's got to be a real conversation when I say, tell me about your balance sheet. Let's talk about your cash flow. Let's talk about your income statements. Sometimes when I've asked people those questions, they thought I was, using profanity against them. And I'm like, no, this is basic business, language that you must know. And it has nothing to do with the color of your skin or what part of town that you're in. If I'm servicing someone in Southern Dallas, I'm going to ask the same questions that I'm going to ask someone in North Dallas or East Dallas or West Dallas, wherever that is, I'm going to ask those questions. Now, I do take into consideration that there is an equity gap as it relates to having, the opportunity to partner with some financial institutions. I do take that, I understand that, but I do think it's incumbent upon business owners to really be able to understand that. And then most importantly is have a diversified funding source. I think it's really good when I hear people say that they got a contract for something. And then when I get their financials, that contract is 80% concentration of their revenues. As a banker, when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, oh my God, if that one funder goes away, how are you going to manage your business? And so I encourage entrepreneurs and business owners to have multiple streams of revenue. Just a tip, as a banker, I'm looking at it, if you have more than 20, 25% of concentration from one particular customer, that's a red flag to me. Because again, if 25% of your revenue goes away, how will you be able to sustain your business? And then lastly is ask business owners, why are you going into business? Be able to really answer that question. Are you an entrepreneur just because you want to be an entrepreneur? What does that look like? What's your plan? What does success look like? When you talk about building wealth, again, that's one of those relative terms to me as well, too, because what's wealthy to me may not necessarily be wealthy to someone who doesn't have 2 feet because they just want to walk. And so we want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what wealth is. And so I ask entrepreneurs all the time, what does wealth mean to you? What does wealth mean? You mentioned, Roy, passing down wealth. Well, again, if your home is a home, that's very different than someone else who's saying, I want to have $10 million in the bank. So I think it's important for them to get clarity on really what's the goal? Are they trying to build capacity? What are they trying to do as it relates to making sure that their business is sustainable?
Absolutely. Wow. So you're really dropping some gems there. But okay, let's say that I am the business owner that actually has a business plan. I've done the research and I am good to go, have advisors on my team and professionals. So I come to you, I would like to know, does Amegy have any special financing programs for those types of minority business enterprises?
You know what, I gotta tell you, last year's social unrest was an opportunity in conjunction with the COVID pandemic was an opportunity for a lot of financial institutions to look inside and to say, you know what, there is a gap here. There's an opportunity here. I heard that firsthand when the PPP program rolled out. And I had friends of mine and business owners that I had spoken with who just weren't ready to be able to take advantage of that funding opportunity. And so what we did at Amegy, and literally we just rolled it out in May, and we did it from an enterprise perspective. Amegy is actually, we're headquartered in Houston, but we're a part of Zions Bancorp, which is in Utah. So we did this from an enterprise-wide perspective. We set up a diversity banking program that's really targeted to MBEs. So, and it's taken into account the fact that maybe they have not had a traditional relationship with the bank. Maybe they haven't had a financial institution in their neighborhood. I like analogies, and I liken it to business. If you told me today to go run a marathon, the Boston Marathon, it probably ain't gonna happen. Because I'm gonna show up and I may have the best looking outfit on, but when I get out there and run for about 5 minutes, you will know that I am not equipped to run that marathon. But with this new diversity banking program that we have, what we're saying to MBEs is we're saying, come to us ready. You come to us, Carlos, we understand that maybe, your financials may not look exactly how we would like for them to look or traditionally have looked. And yes, you have a great business plan, but let us talk to you a little bit about what your financing needs are. So this program allows us to really just take a step back and say, you know what, we understand that this is new for you. We understand that banks have been around since forever, and the credit criteria may look a certain way for more mature, communities or organizations. But where you are today, we want to look at you and figure out if there is a way for us to provide access to capital with you. So this program allows us to provide short-term and long-term credit facilities to businesses. And so you come in and you actually just self-certify and tell us that you're a minority-owned business. And then from there, you go through our application application process. And the great thing that we have with this platform is that we have local decision-making authority. So if you come to us, Carlos, or when you come to us, and it makes sense for us to be able to help you out, we're going to look at every single way that we possibly can to provide access to capital to you. Now, one caveat, we may say to you, you know what, you got a great business plan, your financials look great, but you're not ready yet. And so we'll partner with a CDFI or other, organizations to really get you ready, because we want to make sure that we set you up for success. And we, again, I said earlier, just giving someone access to capital, I can put you out of business by doing that. Because if it's you and you're a one-man band and you're trying to be the cook, the bottle washer, the baker, the cleaner, the financial professional, I'm doing you a disservice by giving you access to capital. So in this program, you're going to have folks that are going to help to mentor you throughout the process. And so it's not a matter of we're going to sign a check and say, here you go, good luck and go on your way. But we really pride ourselves in really taking a consultative approach with all of the businesses that we work with. And so you're going to be stuck with me. You're going to get my cell phone number and I'm going to call you and I'm going to say, are you up? What are you doing? What can I do to help you out? You're going to get access to our Rolodex, where we're going to make sure that we partner with folks like Husch Blackwell to give you the legal support that you need as well too. So it's really a full service kind of opportunity that we're doing, and we're excited to be able to bring this out and to roll it out into the marketplace.
Wow, fantastic. I know we always hear about minority business enterprise, but we don't know much about many may not know much about the certification process. So now I would like to transition this conversation to Andrew.
Okay.
What are the key elements that will enable MBEs to land and expand minority supplier contracts?
I think you heard it, I want to just jump in there and just say being prepared. What we see, and as we go through the certification process and a lot of things that you heard today, being prepared. When PPP rolled out, the banks went to the folks that was already established in there. And so I think you talked about having that banking relationship. It was 100% important when it first came out, because the banks approached those folks and were already ready. So when I go to supplier to tell me, you have to be prepared and know your product and know what you can do. Because again, if you're trying to do business with AT&T, you want to sell the phones or distribute the phones, you have one truck, are you ready to grow? Being prepared, make sure your financials, when you do certification, we may hear folks talk about certified financials. And that's a bad word if you go to the wrong person, because, my uncle's been doing my taxes for this long. But I tell our suppliers, you want to have your ABCs, you want to have your accountant, you want to have your banker, and you want to have your counsel. Because sometimes you'll get these contracts and you're excited for a $10 million deal, but are you ready to handle a $10 million deal? Are you ready to go out and hire employees? When you're a single person, you're self now, when you have to hire employees, now payroll taxes come in, and you don't want to get sideways with the government. That's one way to get your business going, but you want to make sure those things are in place. You want someone, you want counsel, because trust me, their lawyers are going to look at that contract up and down, backward, and you want to make sure there's no penalties in there. But again, the banking relationship is going to be the biggest thing when you're going out to help grow your business. So that's what we see. You get that $10 million contract, now you have to go out and buy this equipment. Oh, wow, where am I going to get the money from? So again, everyone around the table, I think they said the exact same thing. You want those banking relationships first before you get the contract.
Yeah, I think if you're a minority business enterprise, if you're in Dallas-Fort Worth, you need to know Andrew. He needs to be in your Rolodex or somebody from his team. And throughout the United States, they have affiliate organizations like the DFW Supplier Council. You really need to connect with these individuals because they really can help you out. Also, Andrew, are there any key sources of relationships that MBEs should tap into more deliberately to help them source opportunities?
I think, there's a lot of relationships. I can talk about the Dallas area. There's the Dallas Business Journal. There's the News. You always hear about these corporations getting ready to move. Tap it into your CVB, the chambers. If anyone knows who's coming first, the chambers are going to have their ear to the ground. getting ready, looking at those corporations, looking at their end of year statements, looking at their growth plan. What is TI is getting ready to do? Are they expanding up north? Is that an opportunity? If you're in construction, that's opportunity if they're building new buildings. If you sell wafers, they're going to need to expand that plant. Uniforms and different things. So there's a lot of different ways. I think you have to tap into all your resources, your associations, professional associations, your contractor associations, your chambers, and just have your ear to the ground of what's going on. So I think that's where, as MBEs, we miss that. We're just waiting on an opportunity to come to us. Just because you're MBE certified doesn't mean they're going to knock on your door. You're still going to have to go meet, and you're still going to have to find those opportunities. But being MBE certified, you have an opportunity to talk to a supplier diversity professional within that company, and that's their job, is to sit down with you and look into the company and find out when those opportunities are going. You may have to set yourself up on a portal so that way you'll know when those things are coming out, but I think it's really important. Relationships, different events, you want to get out there and make sure people know who you are when those opportunities come.
That's great advice. So let me transition to my partner in crime here, Benjamin. We hear this question all the time, but I do like to hear your perspective on it. Two of the biggest barriers to business growth include lack of existing relationships like networks that unlock access to critical opportunities and lack of capital. Can you tell us how Impact Ventures is set up to address those two particular issues?
Definitely. I think some of the intermediaries that were spoken by all of the panelists here that are often great resources, for minority-owned businesses, but incubators, accelerators, I hate to start to use buzzwords and acronyms, but ESOs, entrepreneur support organizations. So these are all organizations that provide technical assistance, right? And when I say technical assistance, that's really diving into the nuts and bolts and the high-touch services that a lot of minority businesses own, because what we run into is the situation where a lot of minority business owners weren't formally trained in business. They didn't go to business school. They didn't go to Harvard, and get their MBA, right? So a lot of them are operating on passion, right, and not skill. And so because they don't have that, having things like incubators and accelerators, they accelerate areas that you have a deficit in. And one of those biggest areas that you talked about is that social capital piece, right? And so for us as an accelerator, so if those that are listening don't know what an accelerator program is, essentially it's a time-based program that allows entrepreneurs, whether you're a small business or whether you're a high growth type of business, go through a structured program that gives you access to coaching, curriculum and education, mentorship, capital resources if they don't have one within their model, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that social capital piece is great because it allows you to expand your network in spaces where you don't have access. When we talk about access, well, what does access mean? That business moves at the speed of relationships. And so accelerators allow you to get access to people that you would never think you would have access to. Through our program, I think our last week, we had the chief marketing officer for Alchemy, which is a company based in Plano. The chief marketing officer, so Alchemy just went public earlier this year, IPO'd as a company here in North Texas. To have a person like that in the C-suite, be able to have a one-on-one conversation with someone who's probably even pre-revenue or making less than $50,000 a year, you couldn't pay enough money to get access to those people, right? So accelerators, incubators, and programs like ours really accelerate the social network of those individuals, which lead to contract opportunities, which lead to growth and expansion in their customer base and their revenue, which also lead to access to investors, whether it be lenders or whether it be angel investors, et cetera. That social capital piece is it's a critical component to minority-owned business development because a lot of us don't come from those high network relationships and backgrounds, and a family who went to Harvard or a family member that was even successful in business, right? And so that social capital is a crucial component. What was the second? One that you mentioned?
That was it. Tell us how you set up to address how Impact Ventures is set up.
And so I'll say from our relationships, we have a network of 90 mentors from across the country. And these range from successful entrepreneurs to investors to institutional investors to corporate executives that really pour week over week their time, their talent, their energy, their wisdom into our entrepreneurs. And that alone can sometimes be more valuable than capital. You know, a lot of times entrepreneurs talk about, well, what's the one thing if I could ask for today and it'd say $1 million, they ask for capital. Sometimes a relationship can be much more valuable than access to capital. I use the analogy of like Bill Gates and Jay-Z, you know, the billionaires, right? Would you rather receive $1 million investment or be able to spend 365 days, a whole year with this individual, right? And those who don't understand the power of social capital will say, give me the money, right? But without the money, without the wisdom, and without the guidance, right, to go along with that capital, you're doing a disservice, as you mentioned, Sherry. And so that social capital is a critical component. But I think being a part of accelerators is not only networking up and seeing how can you get in front of the investors and the people with the money and people that are doing, but it's also networking across, right? Mm-hmm. I found that a lot of our founders have found more value in building relationships with other founders because other founders are going through the process that you're going through. Now, they might be ahead of you, they might be behind you, but a lot of times when you're in a relationship with other entrepreneurs, they can share relationships, they can share, hey, I went and spoke to so-and-so, they got me a PPP in a week. I went and talked to so-and-so, but if you're so focused on how do I talk to the people at a high level, you'll miss a lot of valuable information and relationship with those people that are in the same, you know, mode, the grind, the mindset that you're in. So I think it's a combination of both knowing who's around you, knowing your business, and then building an ecosystem around your business, right? You talked about the ABCs, right? That can even be broadly looked at as, you know, who are the people in my network? You know, T-Mobile used to have the Fab Five, when you're Fave Five, not the Fab Five, Fave Five, right? So you need to have those individuals in your corner, whether they're mentors or whether they are advisors to your company. People that can take the time to sit with you. I can't tell you how many times I get texts from founders saying, hey, this company just asked for these due diligence documents. What do I do? What do I tell them? How do I frame these conversations? That social capital there is, you can't even put a price on the fact that someone can be readily available for you to answer questions, to help you. Because as a founder, you have to fall in love with being a student and for being a forever learner. And I think once entrepreneurs, you know, disregard that aspect of being a learner, you stop seeking out relationships. You stop seeking out knowledge and information that you might not be privy to. And so,
absolutely, yeah. The only that was great information. Only pushback is when you mentioned Harvard, you can substitute Penn for Harvard.
Insert, I believe, et cetera.
That was absolutely great. And you see why he's a co-sponsor. We're so lucky to have him on this program. Right? So, I keep hearing having the right relationships with the right organization is so important. Cherie, recognizing that Amegy plays a very important role in the ecosystem of creating equitable access to opportunity for minority businesses, what are some things Amegy is doing to extend its reach to be more impactful within this ecosystem?
You know, being in on panels like this, you know, oftentimes, you know, when we grow up, and we were talking about this, a lot of folks of color, the only people we know at the bank is the teller and the person who, you know, walks in and says hello to you. I want to make sure that everyone knows that there's a Cherie Hicks that sits at Amegy Bank, and not just at Amegy Bank, at other financial institutions. So for us, we're out in the community. Now that was pre-COVID. Now we're starting to open back up. But when COVID hit, we launched this web-based program called Amegy Connects You. And really, that was just in response to getting a ton of phone calls all day, people asking us, we don't know what to do. And it was past banking. We really started looking at, okay, how is this impacting your family? Because as a business owner, if you're not making any money, then the rent is not getting paid, then you're not able to pay the light bill, then you know, it's a snowball effect. So we start talking about how is this impacting your family, your business, and your banking relationships. We pull together subject matter experts to really come in and to spend an hour with everyone, and it's virtual, and we're still doing this, and to provide that information. So kind of like what you were saying, Benjamin, you get that chief marketing officer that's going to spend some time with the attendees to teach them just a few quick, you know, nuggets of things that they could possibly do to make their business better. What we found as bankers, and probably a lot of us, we talk to a lot of different people all day, every day. And we probably take for granted a lot of the relationships that we have. So we believe it's incumbent upon us to share those relationships. So we're doing AMG Connects You. We like to be out at events like this. And then as we open up further from the pandemic, you'll begin to see us do different things within our offices to have, MBEs to come in and to get to know us and to talk to us. And more importantly, we try to actually hire from the community, because I think that's important too. To have someone who knows your community, who knows where, if we're talking about minority communities, and I'm in our Bishop Arts office over off of Davis, to know how to get to Gloria's or to know how to get to Rudy's is important. If you're here in Dallas, you got to be able to navigate it. So if you're talking to someone, you want them to be able to understand the language that you're speaking and to understand your barriers, because it's great to read an article about it, but unless you sit in that drive-thru, unless you talk to that person, unless you know, it's just a perceptual value that you're giving. So we're hiring directly from the community so that we can make sure that those business owners see somebody that they know. We're having an events that doing, proactively reaching out to MBEs. And then we're also leveraging our business resource groups. A lot of companies have business resource groups, but ours have been really active. And we looked at each affinity group and we said, hey, talk to us and give us some more information and help us to be able to make sure that we're talking to minority and women-owned and veteran-owned businesses and LGBTQ plus communities as well too, so that we can make sure that we're meeting people exactly where they are. It's great when we can talk about all of our features, but unless they're benefiting the people that we're talking to, we're just talking a language that no one is understanding. So we're really leveraging our business resource groups to be really good, boots on the ground for us to really help us to have a really good pulse on it. Are we there yet at doing everything that we would like to do? Absolutely not. We're still growing. We have a great bank advisory board that really gives us, firsthand information, knowledge about what's going on in the community as well. So we're still growing. We've been in Dallas now for less than 20 years. So we're a new kid on the block when you start to think about banking. Our organization has been around for just over 30 years now. And so we're still learning, and we're nimble enough to where we can really kind of tweak some things on the fly. So I encourage the entrepreneurs that are out there that are listening to reach out to each one of us, and specifically us at AMG, give us some feedback on ways that we can really be better and to really heighten some of the things we're already doing in the community.
Great, that's absolutely great. So Andrew, you're going to close. I'm not sure if you're a big football fan, but there used to be a coach named Herm Edwards, and he had a great speech, and he said, hello, you play the game to win. You play to win the game. So at the end of the day, the purpose of certification is to win business, but that is not always the case. What are some of the technical and procedural details or issues that MBEs are underprepared for that cost them the opportunity to win contracts?
I'll tell you the thing that steps out. You have to educate your workforce. You have to invest in the people that your customers see every day. They have to believe in your vision. They have to be behind you. So that's what we have. There's a lot of programs out there that can help you with that, but invest back into the company. We're talking about wealth, and so instead of getting those profits and doing, how can I invest back into my company? How can I expand? How can I get ready for that next big contract? And the last thing, I think we talked about it there, get that banking relationship. It may not always be the big boxes. When the second round of the PPP came out, the smaller banks were where the opportunities were for the minority businesses. And you want a bank where you can go in, like you say, you don't want a 1-800 number. You want to go in and talk to someone that they can understand your business. And I think that's the key to it. Those relationships are very important when you're trying to grow your business.
Great. Well, I really appreciate Cherie, Andrew, and of course, Benjamin for providing such informative information. So now it's time to move on to our special last and final panel that will be joining us virtually, where we will discuss the needs of entrepreneurs and how they can get support directly from financial institutions, accelerator type programs. For this panel, we will have Robert Hines and Brian Marshall, and Benjamin will be joining the conversation as well. First, with respect to Robert. Robert Hines is the Vice President and Senior Business Consultant at JP Morgan Chase. Robert has over 15 years of experience at JP Morgan Chase and 25 years in financial services. Robert is focused on maximizing his clients' profitability by executing strategic opportunities that fit their business needs, while also seeking ways to reduce operational costs. Robert has provided educational sessions for Chase, Advancing Black Pathways, Black Enterprise, and the National Chamber of Commerce. We also are lucky to have with us Brian Marshall. Brian Marshall serves as Director of Entrepreneurship. Brian is responsible for all statewide small business technical assistance programming for BCL. Brian has 2 decades of industry knowledge and experience with local and state, minority, and women-owned businesses, and historically underutilized business certification program. Brian was named the 2015 Small and Diverse Business Advocate of the Year. Brian has worked on numerous sales initiatives to enlarge large corporate, small minority women, and veteran small business markets. So let's jump right into the discussion. Robert, can you expound on what Chase is doing to assist minority entrepreneurs?
Sure. Thanks, Carlos. And man, what an impressive group of panelists. I am really enjoying the information, so much so that I've actually taken some notes. So I hope the viewers are doing the exact same thing. Back in October of last year, amidst the social unrest, there was a real opportunity to be seen. And our CEO made a fairly bold statement. He came out and committed $30 billion over the next 5 years to the racial wealth gap. And there are 4 pillars in which this really stands on. The first of which is affordable housing and home ownership. And when you look at things historically, that's where the wealth gap was created, hands down. The second component was really around supporting and building minority-owned businesses, both Black and Latinx. And it goes back to something that Roy said earlier, just around, the generation of, income in the household being super important. The third component was financial health. And, there's a big difference between financial education and financial health. The education is what you learn. The health is what you practice, what you do day to day. And then that last pillar was workforce diversity, right? Getting the appreciation for the diverse cultures inside the workforce and what they can bring to solutions. Right? So that commitment has been something that JP Morgan has decided to not only put the financial force behind, but the human force, right? So there have been several positions created inside the bank. I happen to be a beneficiary of one of those as a senior business consultant focused on minority entrepreneurs. I work with individual businesses, Black and Latinx specifically, but women and veteran-owned businesses can also be grouped into that segment. And the idea is to act as a mentor that is integrated into the business and has a full understanding of the business's model, its objectives, its priorities. And then we do this really cool thing called accountability, right? One of the recurring themes that I've heard so far today is really around capital and relationships. And, for me, when I think about capital, I think about intellectual capital first. That's everything that you need to know in preparation for the monetary capital, because one without the other makes no sense, right? So there's a real focus on helping our minority entrepreneurs understand what capital really means. And Ben, I love what you said about the social capital, because that relationship component is huge. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we have as Black and Latinx business owners, quite frankly. We just don't know enough people, right? So given the full breadth and depth of, JP Morgan Chase, the market share, we're able to bring a lot to the table, both internally and externally, to support these small businesses and help them with their path forward. So that's kind of a snapshot of what the organization has committed to, Carlos.
Okay, great. As we learned, banks are not the only financial institutions that can assist MBEs. Brian, what can community development financial institutions like BCL can do to support the growth of startup and growing minority businesses today?
Thanks for having me part of this panel. And I'm like Mr. Hicks, I'm taking notes, learning a lot as well. But to that question, what CDFIs and what BCL is doing as a community lender, I would say one of the main things is target opportunities that support integrated capital. Ben with Impact Ventures, those are type of great partnerships. And what does that mean? It's a different model approach where you can have a layer of equity. You could have seed, but then you could also bring in the community lenders to support these types of programs on the integrated capital model, where we're still targeting the same industries, accelerators, initiatives, but we're bringing in the CDFIs to be part of that versus outside of it, meaning we could be part of that whole program. Collaborate more with CDFI partners, meaning we're not operating in our silos. We are working together to solve problems in ecosystems versus my lane versus your lanes could be another solution. And to the point, I think we've all mentioned it, whether that be Mr. Nash over at Minority Supplier Development, Ben, Ms. Hicks, all of us, probably this whole circle around technical assistance and training are going to be very important. And then the notion that Mr. Hicks just brought up about changing behaviors, being accountable and reinforcing that is another solution that CDFIs can all be a part of and play in as a role to what we can do today to support entrepreneurship between Black and Brown communities.
Great. I'd like to stick with you a little further, Brian. So what are the 2 to 3 key challenges that minority startups and existing firms must address and focus on that are often overlooked but essential to success?
Yeah. And I'm going to reinforce some things Ms. Hiss talked about, understanding cash flow. I think we've all focused on that and understanding in your business. At the end of the day, understanding sometimes the need for capital, and we've had that discussion, is a symptom to a root cause of another problem in the business. So what do I mean by that? And we need to focus on the challenges. False starts, meaning creating products and services in markets that actually don't need your product or service, or there is no market, thus creating the I need more capital, right? Because you don't have a market and you need the capital to sustain the business, right? The other area we need to look at, and that's when you're just starting out. The other is the false positive. You've been in business and you've created a product or service, but you didn't realize that product or service only serves a small market. You got a positive, a reading out of it, hey, I got this market, but then you've oversaturated with it. Meaning, hey, the market, you put the product out there, there's no more market, and then you have to go shift. Now I'm going to keep going back to this access to capital, create new products or services to serve a secondary market just to keep the business open. So some of these are the main challenges, but I'll always go back to what really stops some of our minority, Black and Brown businesses is what we've talked about before, understanding cash flow in the business. JP Morgan Chase has great research on this, on the cash flow viability, the vulnerability of our Black and Brown businesses. It is the #1 downfall, is not understanding how much cash needs to stay in the business. How many days of cash do you really need to be holding in this business? So I'm going to always go back to those 2 areas because they tie together. Understanding cash flow, know what the difference in your business of creating a business with no market, and then also understanding false positives in your business where, hey, wait a minute, I've created a short product or service that doesn't feel fulfilled where the business can grow. these impact all things cash flow.
I must admit, bro, I had to chuckle when you were talking about the business without a market. It brought me to an old Martin episode about rental spoons. Trying to create a market from there. But assuming I'm more serious than that, Robert, I'm legitimately have a business that Mark had done the research and things of that nature. Can you just kind of basically walk me through your mentoring journey with the client?
Sure. So, the key for us, and this was so evident last year, especially with our minority businesses, is really trying to help them transition from survival mode to sustainability mode, right? I think we're genetically positioned to survive, right? Give us the remnants of a pig, we'll make a meal. Give us wood, we'll build a home, right? So we sometimes take that same mentality into the businesses that we operate. And what we try to do in the mentoring journey is we try to help our entrepreneurs identify, some of the basic fundamentals of the industry that they're in, right? To Sherry's point earlier, you'll go into a business because you think it's cool, but you haven't really done the due diligence to see if it's cool enough for someone like you. So we help with industry analysis and helping them gain an appreciation for where they are and what they're doing. We also introduce them to experts, right? Again, to Sherry's point earlier, you don't want to be the same person cleaning, cooking, taking out the trash. You need a circle of folks around you. And sometimes a circle of folks around you are external, whether it's a CPA, an attorney, risk mitigator from an insurance standpoint, a banker, whatever the case may be. We kind of help them gain the appreciation for that. The second thing we do is the opportunity, right? We talk a little bit about opportunities. Some jump to Andrew's point to the MBE certification. Well, man, if I get my MBE certification, then I'm good. Reality is you have to be proactive, once you get that, and go out there and let people know that that's who you are, right? That's a certification you have. We also use our network in some of our markets. We own upwards of 52% of the market share for small business. So that gives the bank a lot of breadth, a lot of depth. We can bring resources to those businesses to help support them. So we kind of talk through that. We look at the business's internal controls. What are the employee relationships like? What is the service level of the business like? It dumbfounds me, and I'll leverage something that Brian just said. But, oftentimes you can ask a business what they need, and they're like, I need money. I need capital. Give me that $1 million, instead of that time with Jay-Z, man, right? And the reality is, money only solves the problems that not having money creates. So if you have bad service or nasty food, people aren't going to come back and support you, right? And that is just the reality. So, we look at those internal controls and we kind of help them gain an appreciation for what that is. And then finally, we jump to the capital if there's a need. And if there's a need that we can fulfill, we make it happen, right? If it's something that falls a little bit outside of a bank's peripheral, then we use our partners like CDFIs or MDIs, to kind of help support that access to credit that they may need. So that's basically what the journey looks like. In some cases, we could skip a step. In other cases, we may have to spend more time on one step than the other.
Okay, great. Benjamin, Brian mentions earlier about this concept of integrated capital. How does Impact Ventures' model of inclusive entrepreneurship, integrated capital, and community wealth building, how does it work?
Yeah, so when we talk about innovation and really just doing things differently, right? As we know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Over time, what we've seen is there's always been moments in time where new innovation happens. You think about Airbnb and Uber; those were birthed out of the 2008, 2009 housing crisis, right? We can go further back in time and see how new innovations, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple, they were all birthed out of times of uncertainty, right? And so for us, this is a model that we wanted to say, okay, what are the systemic and root causes and some of the structural barriers that impede communities from not just starting businesses, because I feel like we do that well, but building and growing businesses and doing the blocking and tackling. Like, it's one thing to be a founder, but to turn into a CEO and have that different mindset, that's a different set of skills. It's a different set of relationships, demands, pressures, and responsibilities that go along with that. And so those three pillars for us really look like, inclusive entrepreneurship is how do we include the voices of people that have been historically marginalized in terms of not just giving them what we think is best for them, but building alongside of them and asking them what they want. And then taking that to them and saying, is this what you were talking about? And if not, going back to the drawing board. So our organization is very keen on data and insights. We probably overwhelm our founders with surveys and touch points where we're asking them, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? And that's what we took from the beginning of our organization. We started in 2017 when the market was very young in terms of, looking at high growth companies. Historically, minority businesses over-index in service-based industries. We can talk about how slavery and how that was kind of the driver of, when you were used to being the house servant or you were used to being the barber or the shoe cleaner, it's a no-brainer that you turn that into the business, right? And so a lot of those industries that we were in, we didn't have exposure to high growth industries, right? And so now that we're in this new industrial revolution, the barrier to entry in terms of these new businesses has gone down. Like, the cost to start a business has extremely gone down, right? Even when you talk about some of the businesses that are more capital or more equipment intensive, the cost to buy a truck nowadays is much less expensive than what it was in the past to get on the road. I mean, I see a lot of people starting trucking companies and providing for their families, even though they're just a one-man shop, but there's enough work to go around. So that inclusive entrepreneurship is really looking at, like, what are the cultural barriers there? So we talk about identity, we talk about confidence. That's a measure that often we don't talk about in entrepreneurship. The fact that a Black or brown person or even a woman can walk in a room full of a male-dominated industry and how that impact has on their performance, right? And what are the barriers that exist? We've even provided wraparound services where we had counseling services provide some of the personal development for some of our entrepreneurs that really, really needed to work on those issues. So the inclusive entrepreneurship is all about, like, how are we designing with community in mind? Not just saying this is a version of entrepreneurship that should fit for everyone, but like, what does that look like for communities of color, where we're already facing complex challenges and complex issues, right, that most other entrepreneurs don't have to deal with. The fact that you can walk in a room, and I can tell you this, if I walk in here with a fitted hat on and a t-shirt and jeans and sneakers, you would probably treat me a completely different way than if I did walking in here with a suit. And so understanding that how I show up sometimes impacts my ability to get contracts, to build relationships, to be taken serious. And those are all things we address when it comes to inclusive entrepreneurship. The second one about integrated capital, and we were talking about in our pre-conversation as we were setting up this conversation for today, around how if you look in society today, there's typically two spectrums that entrepreneurs are being pushed through. And that's to raise venture capital if they want to be this high growth company and they want to be an Inc. magazine, or the glitz and glamour of being this high profile entrepreneur. Or there's this traditional kind of SBA model where you have to fit this cookie cutter. If your credit score is not between 640 and 700, you qualify for, right? And so those are two spectrums that we're pushed at, but oftentimes we don't explore all the options that are in between, right? And I think that's the spaces where folks like Brian and the CDFI world have been exploring, but over time, we need to hit that reset button where we're looking at our structural policies, right? Our underwriting processes. How long have the bank's underwriting processes been the same? Like, Cherie, you could probably say, as long as you've been in the industry, the underwriting process probably hasn't changed, right? But how are we including other demands on the business, like workforce and wages, equality in wages? How are we looking at the quality of gender when it comes to gender equality on the leadership? How are we talking about employee ownership and democratizing decision making within the organization? Those are not just a checkbox of like, hey, we invested in a minority company, but like, how do we go a level deeper in not just can this business return money to me? Like, we have to go beyond that in our underwriting process. So integrated capital is what we've looked at is exploring the spectrum of both grants, debt, and equity. Those are kind of the three ways that businesses could really be funded, like free money, money you got to pay back, and money you have to pay back later, plus more, in the simplest form. And what we found is that entrepreneurial color, because there is a complex challenges that they're facing in running business, you have to match that complexity with the type of capital that they might need to successfully grow. Because if you put a fish on the land, right, and say the fish is dumb because it can't walk, like, whose fault is it? Is it the fish because they can't turn into a person to walk, or am I putting an unrealistic demand on this fish, right? I use that analogy, but I say that to say, we expect entrepreneurs of color to walk in a situation with the same type of business and same type of acumen when the average business revenue of a Black-owned business is $51,000, right? 97% of our businesses are sole proprietorships, right? So they don't have the scalability, the growth. I don't know how many people you can pay on 51,000 average revenue as a company, right? We're 3 times as more likely to be denied for a business loan, than our white counterparts. So all these barriers that exist, we still have the same demands. We're still looking at them and evaluating them with the same demands of underwriting process as others, not acknowledging these structural barriers that have been put in place. And so the third part of this is community wealth building. So oftentimes unaccredited investors, so everyday people, are excluded from wealth building opportunities. You talked earlier about how do we get people more knowledge about the stock market and stock ownership and just investing in itself. So we've created a model where our fund will not only invest in Black and Brown owned businesses, but will allow unaccredited investors to be able to participate in our fund in terms of the wealth building strategy, right? So oftentimes when you think about discretionary income, there might be folks out there with $500, $1,000, $2,000 that they have in a savings account or something where, if they go to a traditional bank, they might get 0.001%, back on their return. And so we're able to build a model where they can not only get a return on their investment, but they also can invest in their local community, right? And as we know, 83% of Black-owned businesses hire people from their community, people that look like them. So not only am I investing in the business that of a person that shares my values, my experience, my relationships, but I know that's going to build a stronger community because they're going to hire someone else that looks like me, right? And so it's this compound effect that we've been able to create. And, through that, it has some challenges, right? And some of those challenges is that the ecosystem might not be yet prepared for the demands of something new, right? So getting financial institutions, traditional lenders, traditional banks to kind of double check what the requirements are when they give to CDFIs or give to these charitable loan funds and say, we expect your repayment rate to be 95% and above, right? And so putting those demands on a lender or an investor, knowing that the market that they're investing in from the jump is a risky market, like, we have to consider another metric for success, right? Even as a country, we look at GDP as like our success rate, gross domestic product, but it doesn't take in consider, unemployment, racism, structural barriers, policy, redlining, like all these things, health crisis, COVID, all those things that say, are we successful as an economy? If we only look at consumption and we're just consuming, like how is that really a definition of success? So in all, I say this integrated capital model and what we've built and we continue to build is a new way to look at a complex problem that we're trying to solve. And it's going to take a multi-sector approach. And I think in the past, we've done things in silos. Even as we're approaching investors and financial institutions, when we say, hey, we're raising integrated capital, and I talk to the philanthropy department, they send me over to the investment, the banking department, and then I tell them, and then they send me back over to the philanthropy department, and there's no connection. There's no communication amongst these departments that could really build products that really move the needle. But again, those are where the areas of friction, that conversations like this enlighten folks that are saying, hey, well, maybe we should explore that. Or maybe, when's the last time I actually talked to my investment banking team? Let me just do a Monday check-in and say, hey, what are you guys working on, and where can we collaborate? And so this is really about how are we improving and changing systemic challenges that yes, we're making impact. I can tell you about the stories that we're having, but really removing those barriers like access to credit through credit scores, requiring personal guarantees. Those are all things that we're looking at to really democratize capital, to get them in a place so they can meet the Sharifs, they can meet the Andrews, they can go talk to Brian and get a loan. And so that's really the process and what we're creating here.
Well, that was great. Before we leave our virtual panelists, did you all want to provide any final words? All right.
Then
Drop the mic.
Yeah, I mean, come on, you're ready for that. At the end of the day, we do no good if we don't sit in front of business owners that have a need. We do no good if we don't sit in front of business owners that we can help support through, again, the intellectual capital that we possess and the access to the monetary capital. We want to help businesses be successful. We want to build relationships with our mentees, with our clients. And to everyone's point, we want you to call us. We want to cultivate a friendship. We want to be able to move you from where you are to where you deserve to be. So, again, Carlos, thank you. I appreciate the invitation. This has been phenomenal as it relates to the sharing of information.
Glad to have you all.
Appreciate it.
All right. Glad you all could join us, and you add so much value to the conversation. So now we're going to get ready to close. Benjamin's going to provide a closing for Impact Ventures, and I'll provide the closing for Husch Blackwell. Benjamin?
Definitely. I mean, I had some points I wanted to make, but I think this moment really calls for us to really just reflect on what we're embarking on when we talk about Juneteenth. Like the idea of liberation and freedom and what that really means. And I think as we look through all of our leaders, our civil rights leaders, and what they were doing, like without the economic justice, like social justice and civic justice, without the economic justice is not truly justice. And so as we reflect, and as you all reflect on, Juneteenth and what that really means to you, what all the folks around this table are really talking about here is economic justice, like the ability and the right to live a full life at the means that you want to live on your terms, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like every human should be given that right to do that, and there should not be barriers and structural barriers and things put in place to impede, that. So to connect with us, I know we had some points to make. We actually just launched our Dallas Inclusive Capital Fund, and so I want to invite you all, those that are entrepreneurs, that are joining us today, as well as financial institutions and philanthropic institutions to connect with us to talk more about that. We have a $20 million mandate to invest over the next 10 years in Black and minority-owned businesses across North Texas and the state of Texas. And then also, we just recently launched our application for our fall 2021 accelerator program. So if you can go to our website at Impact Ventures, impact-ventures.co, you can apply to our two programs that we have coming up, our lead track for traditional small businesses and our inclusive innovation track for high growth industry businesses. So Carlos, this was awesome for you guys to partner with us to put this together. I hope you all have a great weekend celebrating liberation and freedom. And we're excited to continue this work here in North Texas and across the U.S.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. I guess I need to make sure for this closing that I mention my Roy disclaimers. Anything I say does not create an attorney-client privilege, but of course we would like you to be clients if you choose it. As well as anything positive is on behalf of Husch Blackwell, anything negative you take out is on part of me. So I put that out there. But on behalf of Husch Blackwell, I would like to send a heartfelt thank you to the panelists for participating in this webinar and providing thoughtful and honest insight about this important topic. these panelists informed me that they want to be held accountable for their commitment to help MBEs. So please hold them accountable and feel free to reach out to them and their respective teams. We are very grateful to partner with Impact Ventures on this webinar, and we are extremely appreciative of all the contributions and efforts that Benjamin and Lucy made in making this event happen. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my internal colleagues of Emily, Luke, Alicia, for organizing and producing this event, and Sean and Jeff for IT support and AV support. I really appreciate it. And last, but definitely not least, we would like to thank you for joining us today. So, what are the next steps for Husch Blackwell? At Husch, we would like to do more than just have ivory tower or pie in the sky type discussions and programs around this and similar topics. At Husch, we are committed to being a leader and advocate in this space. To this end, Husch has created the Economic Development Impact Practice. This practice consists of a diverse team of professionals that have a focus on sustaining and scaling MBEs through cost-conscious and affordable legal, advocacy, and networking solutions, whether it's corporate formation, procuring capital, IP protection, commercial and government contracting, HR counsel, or dispute resolution. We have it covered. The URL of our practice is listed on the PowerPoint. Please visit the page and check out our experienced and practice team leaders. We believe our solution offerings will help MBEs grow and prosper, and subsequently help reduce the racial wealth gap. This confidence is bolstered by many of our current MBE clients. For example, I have seen firsthand how a minority-owned quick service franchisor has created multiple millionaires. Thank you, Williams Chicken. How a newly franchised fast casual restaurant has produced outstanding financial results and created six-figure incomes for a couple of franchisees that were formerly unemployed 6 months early. Thank you, Mr. Everything Cafe. I have witnessed firsthand how an emerging crowdsourced healthcare delivery concept has created high-paying, high-tech jobs. Thank you, CoreMed. I have witnessed how a pescatarian-based concept owned by a multi-platinum songwriter and producer is helping to provide healthier eating habits in the community. Thank you, Local Green Atlanta. I can testify on how a wellness-based franchise concept with a culturally infused message of self-help and community is poised for substantial growth. Thank you, eRefresh. And I have seen firsthand how a salon-based concept is making it viable for beauticians and barbers to improve their branding and increase their clientele. Thank you, Encore Salon Suites. These are just a few of the sheroes and hero MBEs that have thrived in the pandemic and helping to reduce the wealth gap. Guess what? There are thousands of other small MBEs that are or have the potential to have the same impact. Based on today's conversations, some of the practical and affordable solutions to empower MBEs include helping them transform their business plans into legally compliant capital raising documents, increasing the opportunities for middle-class Americans to invest in minority business enterprise and structuring private offerings, educating and advising MBEs on what are market deal terms for loan and investment agreements, utilizing existing tax laws to structure deals to incentivize angel and venture capital investments, developing contracting strategies to mitigate personal guarantees for MBE owners and increase cash flow for MBEs, incorporating less capital-intensive growth strategies like franchising to help MBEs rapidly grow their business. And finally, and most importantly, building the MBE ecosystem by hosting periodic networking, matchmaking events with MBEs, larger companies, financial institutions, and stakeholders that are interested in investing in MBEs. We are out of time for this program today. As a reminder, please take a moment to complete our short survey. We will use your feedback to plan for future programs. We look forward to working with you, and we will keep you informed with all our upcoming educational and networking events. This closes our program for today. Have a great weekend and enjoy your holiday.